When Coventry City secured promotion to the Premier League, most people celebrated the achievement.
Matt, congratulations. What a moment for you. What was it like lifting that trophy?
Incredible, incredible. It's not the only dream of. You never think it's going to happen to you. And yeah, just unbelievable day. Unbelievable.
I became interested in something else, how they got there. Because the more matches I watched, the less this looked like a championship team simply riding momentum. Certain patterns kept appearing, the same build-up, the same movements, the same solutions to different problems. It looked coached. Because for years, Frank Lampard's managerial career had been defined by one question. Was he actually a good coach, or simply a great player trying to become one? Coventry City might have provided the answer, not because they got promoted, but because the more I watched, the more two tactical ideas kept appearing again and again. Ideas that transform the way Coventry played and may decide whether they survive in the Premier League. So, what exactly were they? And more importantly, will they still work against England's best? When Frank Lampard arrived at Coventry City, he didn't inherit a bad football team. In fact, they already had enough quality to compete with almost anyone in the Championship. The problem was, you never quite knew which Coventry would turn up. Some matches, they looked calm in possession. They progressed the ball well. They created chances. Then the next game, one aggressive press would completely change everything. Their build-up became rushed. Their attacks became predictable. And suddenly, they were playing the opponent's game instead of their own. That inconsistency was the real problem. Not because Coventry lacked talent, but because they didn't always control how matches were played. And I think that's the first thing Lampard recognised. He wasn't searching for a new formation or a revolutionary tactical system. He was looking for something much simpler. A way to make Coventry play on their own terms, regardless of who stood in front of them. Because promotion isn't usually decided by the team that plays brilliantly once, it's decided by the team that can repeat the same ideas week after week. And once I started looking at Coventry through that lens, the tactical changes Lampard introduced made much more sense. They weren't random adjustments, they were all solving the same problem. The question was, where did he start? The first tactical change Frank Lampard made was surprisingly risky. Most championship teams try to avoid pressure. Coventry started inviting it. Watch what happens when their goalkeeper has the ball. Instead of rushing the first pass, the centre-back split wider. The holding midfielder stays patient. The goalkeeper waits. At first, it almost looks like Coventry are doing nothing, but that's exactly the point. Every extra second encourages the opposition to step forward. The striker presses, a midfielder follows, sometimes even a full back joins in. And with every player that leaves their position, another space quietly opens somewhere else. Here's the interesting part. The press Coventry wanted to beat was the one they invited themselves. That's the trap. Coventry weren't trying to beat the press with quicker passing. They were trying to make the press defeat itself. Once enough opponents committed, one vertical pass changed everything. Suddenly, the first line of pressure was gone. Midfielders could receive facing forward. Wide players attacked open space. The pitch instantly felt bigger. It wasn't spectacular. Most people probably didn't even notice it happening. But that's what made it so effective. Because football isn't always about creating space. Sometimes it's about convincing your opponent to give it to you. And that became one of the clearest fingerprints of Frank Lampard's Coventry City. But escaping the press was only the beginning. The more interesting question was, what did they do with all that space? The more Coventry matches I watched, the more one pattern kept appearing. The obvious pass was rarely the one that really mattered. Instead, it became the setup for the next one. Imagine a centre-back carrying the ball forward. The opposition expects the pass into midfield, and Coventry happily plays it. But here's where everything changes. The midfielder doesn't always turn. He often lays the ball off first time. Suddenly, a third player receives the ball facing forward. The first line has been beaten, the midfield is exposed, and Coventry are attacking before the opposition can recover. It happens so quickly, most fans probably don't even notice it. But these third-man combinations became one of the quiet strengths of Lampard's Coventry, because they solved a problem every team faces. How do you progress the ball when every obvious passing lane has already been closed? Most teams try to force a difficult pass. Coventry created a new passing lane instead that required trust, timing, and players who already knew where the next pass was going before they even received the current one. It's one thing to move the ball quickly, it's another to move the opposition, and that's exactly what these combinations achieved. Defenders were constantly being forced into a choice: step towards the first receiver or stay with the runner behind. The problem was that Coventry had already prepared for whichever decision they made. If the defender stepped out, space opened behind. If he stayed, the player on the ball had time to turn. Either way, Coventry had the advantage. That's why their attacks often looked so effortless. Not because they had more talented players than everyone else, but because the defence was usually reacting, while Coventry were already playing the next pass. The pass everyone expected was almost never the one that hurt them. It was the one after that. Those combinations worked brilliantly in the Championship, but they'll now be tested against defenders who read the game faster, close space quicker, and punish even the smallest hesitation. That's why the Premier League isn't just a bigger stage, it's a completely different examination. That's what makes this season so fascinating. Not because Coventry have reached the Premier League, but because the two ideas we've just talked about are about to face their biggest examination. Inviting pressure only works if you escape it. Third-man combinations only work if every movement and every pass arrive at exactly the right moment. In the Championship, those margins were usually enough. In the Premier League, they become much smaller. Not simply because the players are better, but because the game moves faster. Presses arrive a fraction earlier, defenders recover a fraction quicker, and moments that once lasted a second can disappear in an instant. That doesn't mean Frank Lampard should abandon what got Coventry here. I actually think the opposite. The principles shouldn't change, the execution has to, because in the Premier League, hesitation is often the difference between escaping the press and conceding from it. That means knowing when to play through pressure and when to play beyond it. Knowing when to be patient and when to move the ball early. Because the Premier League doesn't punish good ideas, it punishes ideas that stop evolving. If Coventry can keep evolving without losing the courage that's defined them, they'll give themselves a genuine chance. And that's the real story I'm looking forward to this season. We're not just about to discover whether Coventry belong in the Premier League. We're about to discover whether Frank Lampard's football belongs there too. We'll only know whether this project succeeds once the season begins. Because building a clear identity in the Championship is one thing. Proving it against the best teams in England is something else entirely. The ideas are there. Now they have to survive against a completely different level of opposition. And that's why Coventry City are one of the most interesting teams to watch this season. Not just because they've returned to the Premier League, but because they're about to become the biggest test of Frank Lampard's coaching career. Maybe Coventry City weren't the only ones being reinvented. Maybe Frank Lampard was too. And over the next 9 months, we'll find out whether it really worked. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more videos exploring the tactics, ideas and stories shaping modern football, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Do you think Frank Lampard's football can survive in the Premier League? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.